Working now because it's definitely in the red. If you're not being able to hear the audio, there's not much I can do about it. But as far as I can see on OBS, I'm actually literally in the red, so it should be distorting. So anyways, we'll try this again. Thank you. So here's some of the brushes from Pablo's creature skin. So I'm just going to kind of play with a few of these, the skin texture ones. This is kind of what we're getting for this one. It's kind of a nice bumpy skin. I like holding the Alt key and getting it kind of, lower the smoothing a little bit. This is kind of a nice looking noise brush. I'm going to use the SK cloth to add some more kind of wrinkles on here. I'm not sure what kind of blurring you're talking about. What type of texture are you exporting? Is it a displacement map? Is it a texture map? What are you using? Are you using multi-map exporter? What are your UVs? I'd have to know the specifics of your project to explain what you might be encountering, but you know. If you're doing something like normal maps, I would use Substance or Marmoset for normal maps. I generally use ZBrush for making displacement maps, and I usually make 4K EXR. Sorry, I'm 32-bit EXRs. But I'd have to know the specifics of what your problem is. Another brush that I really like to use is the Orb Cracks brush. This one is great for doing this types of sort of damaged and cracked kind of look. Yeah, I would do. I would use Substance. You know, when I do texturing, as I mentioned before in my live stream, I generally do displacement in ZBrush, which you probably don't want to use in a game engine, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're using texture maps, I do polypaint, export the texture maps, and then upres them in something like Substance. I think that's a better way to go. I think if you just use a polypaint to texture map straight out of ZBrush, you're not going to get. I think you'd be better to upres them in Substance. And I'm not crazy about the way that ZBrush makes normal maps. I'd use that in Substance as well. Yeah, and I would imagine if you're doing a game engine, you're probably not using displacement. But like I said, displacement works well from ZBrush. But if you're going to do normal, I would export a high res and low res and bake them in probably Marmoset or Substance is your best bet. these guys are sharper point. I'm using a Cintiq. If you're using an iPad, just get ZBrush for the iPad. I'm not using an iPad. I'm using a Cintiq. ZBrush for the iPad is really cool. It's definitely worth checking out. I use it when I'm on the road or not at home. The interface is different, so it takes a bit getting used to, but it's very stripped down. It has a lot of improvements on the interface versus the desktop. Okay, I'm gonna break up the symmetry here a little bit. It'd be fun to break one of these off. And then I'm using an H polish brush here to sharpen this. Set, increase the point count there. Let's check out one of Pablo's brushes again. I like this one. This one's very cool. It's called the ZBrush Skin Texture 01. Let's check out some of his other brushes, just for fun. Skin Texture 02. Oh, that's really cool. Smooth this out a little bit. Maybe lower the Z intensity. Nice way to get cracks on here. AI will do this in a few seconds. Yeah, we talk about AI a lot on this channel. As far as I know, AI doesn't have any fun doing it. That's the point of doing it. The other problem is that I've played with AI enough to know that it's great for doing something random and getting something close, but if you actually work in production, like I do, then you work with art directors and directors who want something very, very specific. And AI is terrible at getting something very specific. It can create some, I do think slop is the right word for it, very quickly. But if you actually work in the industry, if you want to work in the industry, if you're just a hobbyist and you want to make art to impress people, then I think AI is fine. Feel free to go ahead and do that. You might find yourself not getting a whole lot of fans, though, outside of the AI community. There's a really good video by a storyboard artist who compares doing AI with his own AI thing. Let's see if I can pull it up because it's worth checking out. Let's see. Give me just a second. Get through all this stuff. Ink and Grow Rich. This guy has some great videos. He's a storyboard artist. And he has one here on Can AI Handle a Real Job? I highly recommend this video. He's talking about, he's a professional, has been in the industry for 30 years, so he's taking a job that he did several years ago, and then having AI redo the same job just to see the results. And from a professional point of view, this is a really excellent one to watch. So I highly recommend that. If you just want to troll about AI, that's fine. You can do that too. You made me feel terrible. Congratulations. Everybody's not happy about AI except for the really rich people who don't care in the first place. There are people who are just trying to make money. Yeah, he's that guy has great videos. The storyboard artist, highly recommend it. I'm just using Pablo's brush to kind of add, kind of the way I would use like noise or something like that. Just to get a little bit of just damage on here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with using, like I frequently do the clay polish technique. See, that brings out some of the details here. Let's see one of his other brushes here. I'm not using the insect brushes, but I'll check those out in a second. These are all from the creature skin pack. So I'll just pick one here at random. There's so many of them. It's like you can usually find one that does something like what you want to do. That's kind of cool. You know, I got some okay detail on there. Let's go back to the orbs crack real quick. The industry is always changing. It's changing every second of every day. I've been doing this since 1998. So I've been doing CG since before there was ZBrush professionally. And the only thing I can say is ZBrush professionally. And the only thing I can say is that you just have to jump in and go with the flow. Years ago, I saw a virtual reality demonstration, and I thought VR was going to instantly change the entire world within months, and it kind of fizzled. You have no idea what's actually going to work. Best thing to do, if you want to work in the industry, if you're just doing art for fun, that's a completely different topic. But if you're trying to make a living like I am, then you kind of just have to go with it and expect it to change. And, you know, like I said, I'm going to grumble about AI. I'm never going to not grumble about it because it's frustrating when you spend all this time building these skills and then somebody can just tap into a computer. And it's like if you want to do like anime characters and you're really into anime, yeah, AI is probably already beat you to the punch there. And that's disappointing for everyone, but it's just the fact, you know. So you just have to kind of go with it. You can't be a Luddite and a digital artist at the same time. You have to embrace the new technologies and use them as best as you can. But I will say it's like, you know, when it comes to working in the industry, I've noticed like, you know, work is starting to pick up quite a bit recently. Like it went from, you know, I was working an awful lot back in 22 and 23, and then it dropped off after the writer's strike, and it's just now starting to come in their style, and just doing something that's kind of sort of close is not going to cut it because they're analyzing every single frame of everything that you do, and they want something very specific. So maybe in the future, who knows? But you know, AI might change completely the nature nature of entertainment itself. You know, it might truly become more of an interactive thing where you're interacting with AI to create your own story that's for you to enjoy, or maybe a small group of people as opposed to a mass market kind of thing. You just got to do it, you know. I'm working on Arachnid Warrior from Starship Trooper, my own take on this. So I've been doing this for the past few weeks. Right now I'm just kind of detailing this and just kind of playing around with some of Pablo's brushes and seeing what kind of results I can get. Kind of loading them up at random here. Let's take a look at some of his insect brushes. Insect rake. Let's see how that looks. Looks like a rake brush to me. I don't know what's insect about it, but that's kind of nice. A little bit strong. That one might be fun for this part right here. The Z intensity might be kind of an interesting texture to add to this. Yeah, that's kind of cool. You know, the thing about, you know, when you're working in the industry, As I've worked in, entertainment and science visualization, and jewelry making, all kinds of different aspects using CG. And what it comes down to is you have to actually love the act of doing it, because you're going to be doing it like I did all day today. You're going to be doing a lot. If you're doing it, the wrong reason into doing 3D and digital art is to get your name on a movie credits, just as a way to brag about being in the industry, because the industry doesn't really care that much. They're just trying to make a buck. And that's kind of the wrong reason to do it. If you love the actual doing of it, if you're going to do it regardless of whether you're going to get paid or not, that's a better reason to do it, because you're going to be doing all kinds of projects. I mean, I've done really cool stuff, movies and all that kind of stuff, and I've done feminine hygiene product commercials, and I've done stuff that's not as glamorous at all, but I've enjoyed the process of doing it, including that commercial, and that's really what it comes down to. I also don't do it to get rich, because the money comes and goes really quickly. So this is kind of interesting, just playing with this. I've already played with the microphone, and as far as I can tell, the microphone is in the red. So I can't adjust it anymore on my end. Whatever the problem is with the sound, I can't tell you. We had another person complain about it. I spent a few minutes working with my sound. This is literally right now is completely in the red. And as far as the video dropping, I have no idea. That's maybe a connection issue. I don't have any problems with connection on my end over here. The adjustment is of a physical nature. I have no idea how to address that. I need to move it in a different area. Now I'm hearing that it's a little loud. So I don't know what to tell you. Some people are saying they can't hear it. Some people are saying the audio is fine. Can I put the mic under my monitor? Does that work better? I would think that would be worse. Okay, how about that? It's kind of hard to sculpt like this, but I'll try. This is about, I think, the best that I can do. Okay. Thank you, Substance. I don't know that what I'm saying is that interesting anyways. Sculpt a lot. How about that? Starting to feel like Michael Richards flaming out at the Comedy Store here. Okay, let's see. I kind of turned off symmetry, so which is cool because it's asymmetrical, but it also means I had to do more work. I don't know this. Oh, this is kind of cool. I like this. What I'm going to do, okay, so we got kind of some nice noisy high frequency stuff going on here. I'm going to clear the mask and switch over to H polish brush. And make this a little bit sharper, a little bit more dangerous looking. Also give some smooth areas so that the eye is not overwhelmed with detail. One thing I would say, the designs for these bugs for this movie, I had to go back and watch the whole movie again. I mean, I've seen it a few times, but it's been a while. Is I can't remember. I don't think their bugs are very hairy. If you're doing realistic bugs, it's important to have hair on your bugs, even just a little bit. Will increase the realism. These guys are not that hairy. And of course, back when this movie was made, CG hair was not something that was easy to do, if at all. Let's see. Looks kind of cool. Let's save this. I'm going to go back to this part and play with some more brushes here. Let's see. Back to the thick, bumpy pores. That sounds interesting. Oh yeah, that's neat. I like that. Again, in case you're just tuning in, I'm playing with some of Pablo's brushes. He's got some really cool ones. So I'm playing with his insect detailing brushes and his creature pack. So doing a little shout out to his stuff. I'm going to subdivide this guy so I get even more detail out of him. There we go, about 6 million. Oh, there we go. That's nice. Nice and gross and disgusting. If you do retopology, you can always project. Projection is the way you would get the details. You can project from history, you can project from other subtools. That's basically the name of the game right there. You can retopologize this as many times as you want. And then project fine detail onto it. In fact, I've retopologized these several times while making this. This right now, I mean, the topology is okay. You know, that's what it looks like. It's good for sculpting. I don't know if this is something I am planning on animating it anytime soon. I just did a Z-remesh topology. But I usually start with doing Dynamesh, and then get that up to a certain point, and then I'll store it, undo history, Z-remesh, project that detail onto the Z-remeshed version. You do it as many times as you like. The only difficulty with projection is you have to be careful because sometimes you'll end up getting projection errors, which you'll have to go back and clean up and that kind of thing. If you're careful, it shouldn't be too bad. Every once in a while, I'm not careful and I end up having to do a lot of cleanup or just going back and redoing it. But other than that, you can usually get a very fine level of detail. The other thing you can do is, which I've done, is you know, if you do like normal maps in Substance or whatever, you can always like do, you know, decimate a model at a high polygon count and bring that into Substance and use that as your high poly to project onto your low poly to bake your textures. That works too sometimes too. That's kind of cool. Of course, I'm doing kind of an overall detail, same kind of detail over everything, which is usually something I try not to do, but we'll see. Let's play with this a little bit more. I'm going to go in here. I know he's got some other cool brushes. Oh, crackle sounds interesting. Let's put this into like these parts right here. That's kind of cool. Blender versus ZBrush. That's an interesting question. I've done some sculpting in Blender, and it's pretty good. I've used ZBrush since 2004, so for me, ZBrush is much more natural. I think the brushes are more powerful in ZBrush. So you can get, they're easier to design, easier to use. I mean, I'm using Pablo's brushes tonight, but I design my own brushes all the time. And I think that's one of ZBrush's biggest benefits, is how powerful it is in terms of what you can do with the brushes. So I'm going to be heavily biased towards ZBrush. Because number one, this is a ZBrush channel, and number two, like I said, I've been using ZBrush forever. What I would say is that Blender, like I'm learning Blender whenever I get a chance. I'm also a Maya artist. I've been using the Maya for years, and Blender is a replacement for Maya. I can totally see that. Even studios are starting to use Blender more often. I think it's Maya still is more of a high-end tool and has stronger pipeline. But that being said, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with Blender. I've been learning Blender rigging. It's not quite as sophisticated as Maya rigging, but Blender modeling is really nice, and the sculpting tools in Maya are just not that great. And if you're going to compare Maya to Blender, then definitely I think Blender for sculpting is much better. But I think that ZBrush to me feels more natural, more like working with clay than Blender. I kind of like the combination of using these brushes together, sort of this brush leading into this one right here. I think it's kind of interesting. So I'm using this kind of like in the crevices here, almost like veining. And then what I might do is go in here with H polish and just on the higher parts, just smooth it out a little bit. So like I say, it's not constantly the same level of detail. Let me sharpen this edge a little bit. If you're just getting into CG and learning CG, then Blender is definitely a great way to go as a replacement for something like Maya, because Maya is very expensive. I don't know if there's a connection issue tonight or for some reason. It doesn't seem to be happening on my end, but a couple people complained that the stream gets interrupted. I'm not sure what's causing that. I haven't had any connection problems over here, as far as I can tell. But you're not the only person who's had an issue with the connection tonight. And also a lot of complaints in the audio, but as far as I can tell, my audio levels are pretty high over here on this end. So I don't know if it's a server thing. I'm not really an internet guy. So Okay, well, I'm sorry about the technical issues. I don't know where they're coming from. 3D screens without glasses. I haven't tried that, so I've done some VR sculpting, which I found kind of tiring. It's neat, but I can't imagine doing sculpting in VR for like 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. That would be really difficult. But I haven't tried 3D screens without glasses. That sounds very interesting. Okay, I think I've done enough on that. Let's do. Trying to make this look a bit more organic here. I'll have to try one of those out because I haven't seen them. But yeah, if I don't have to wear something and I can really get a sense of the shape, I mean, I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of like if you used a stereoscopic microscope as opposed to just a regular microscope. The stereoscopic makes it much more interesting. You can really get a sense of the 3D shape of what you're looking at. I don't know if they have a stereo 3D Cintiq, that would be nice because personally I like drawing on the screen. I know some people don't; they prefer like a Wacom tablet, but I like to be able to draw directly on the screen. So I've used Cintiqs for 15 years now, at least, if not more. I used to have that really crappy 12-inch Cintiq with all the cables and stuff. Boy, that thing was a pain. I had another Cintiq that thing was unstoppable. The only reason I don't have it was too big to bring with me to Europe. I have the smaller one now, but man, that thing worked perfectly for 10, 12 years straight. Never had an issue with it, other than it being really huge and really heavy. It was the old version of the 22-inch Cintiq. Okay, I think I'm just goofing around now. I don't know if I'm adding anything. Let's save this real quick. Some detailing I can do on the legs. Obviously, the legs and these guys are pretty good. I think I'm missing too much detail on here. I gotta get some of those cracks going again. I'm gonna reset this brush real quick. There we go. I like to add these little cracks here. Looks like battle damage, you know. Turn off symmetry. Yeah, doing Starship Troopers tonight. I've been working on it for the past few sessions, past few Mondays. This is sort of my own take on it. I kind of almost feel like starting to paint this thing just for fun. Get some color going so we're not looking at this blue the whole time. All that looked couldn't, is that a statement or a question? I'm using ZBrush, I'm not using Mari. If I was doing a Mari live stream, maybe. I've used Mari in the past and it's okay. I prefer ZBrush. That's just what I'm used to working in. It's more of a sculptural thing. I found Mari overly clunky and overly technically just not very intuitive to use, but that's just my own impression of it. I haven't used it in a while. All that looked up couldn't be done in Mari. Well, I don't know. Are you a Mari user? For me, I'm not. I don't want to necessarily constantly jump from one program to another just to do everything when I know I can do this kind of stuff ZBrush. I would call this, whoops, I hate that button. I wouldn't call this look dev so much as I would call it sculpting. Yeah, I think Mari is more for like texturing. Like doing sculpting, I don't know. It seems like it would be difficult. I mean, ZBrush is kind of the industry standard for sculpting because the tools are much more intuitive and sculpting-like. I found I was working on Mari for the planetarium show that I did a few years ago, and for some reason I found myself pressing really, really hard to get the kind of paint strokes that I wanted. And on the exact same computer, exact same setup, I didn't have that problem with ZBrush or Substance. It was just something about the way Mario was set up that made it really kind of painful, like literally painful to use. But again, that's just me. Some people love it. I'm just not a Mari guy. But you can also do some texturing in ZBrush. Like I was saying earlier, I'll do like poly painting and maybe diffuse maps and displacement maps in ZBrush. And then I'll finish up the, depending on what I'm trying to do with the project. This is something I'm doing just for ZBrush, just for this channel, you know. But, you know, for something like the production model, I might use Substance or Marmoset for doing all the maps other than, you know, what I poly paint, or my poly paint in ZBrush exported as a texture and then bring it into Substance or Marmoset and augment it there, you know. So let's do a little poly painting just for fun. So as we can see, this is largely black and yellow in most of these versions with some red. We got some stripes going, some this kind of stuff, sort of war markings. This one's kind of interesting. They're all slightly different in each version. That's the toy, I think. So we're going to do our own version of it. This one's kind of nice. Let's save this. And let's see if there's a new version. And I'm going to pick like not black, but maybe a dark gray. And just do color, fill object. Let's switch over to paintbrush. I'm going to hold the shift key for the smooth brush, turn off Z add and leave RGB on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit. I'm going to get kind of a nice blotchy stroke. Something like this. Get kind of an orangey yellow going. Yeah, I think I have to agree with you. So the comment is, the way I understood Mari at the time I studied, it's rather for render models with very individual complex shader setups as well as larger texture sizes. Yeah, that's what I've used it for. I used it for painting, you know, this exploding planet for this planetarium show that had all these volcanoes and lava streaks and all that kind of stuff. It was good for that, but they're really, really high res textures. I think they're like 24K or something like that. and it was something that was going to be rendered in Arnold. I know that Mari has created some tools for doing like PBR type stuff, but I think Substance is far better for that. Okay, so I'm going to do some, whoops. So let's paint some strokes here. So I'm going to turn off Lazy Mouse, and I'm going to add a little bit of the stroke, a little stroke jitter. I'm going to press the O hotkey and lower my focal shift, and I'm going to go in here to the brush palette, and under tablet pressure, under RGB intensity, I'm going to edit this graph a little bit so it's not such a curve. Let's do this. Let's do reset. Curve is being annoying. Yeah, something like that's good. And bring down the RGB intensity a little bit. And undo those strokes. And just looking at this, I kind of like the versions here, kind of like this, where it's kind of like directing the eye inward towards the gap here between these two teeth. So this kind of explosive kind of look. And I'm going to be kind of sloppy at first, because I'm going to refine it later. I want it to look like war paint. And I'm going to leave symmetry off. And change the background color a little bit. Get rid of that gradient. Maybe make this like this. And press the C key to sample the color. Alright, I'm going to do this. I'm being indecisive, sorry. is, let's move this off to the side here. I'm going to press Shift S just to drop it to the canvas so that as I'm working on the other side, I can kind of match it a little bit. I'm going to go in here and sample this color, lower my brush size, and just refine this a little bit. So this is sort of like war paint, in my opinion. It might be naturally occurring for this alien, but that's the kind of effect that I want to give. And then what I'll do is I'll layer color detail on top of it to make it look a bit more interesting. I'll probably come back and do those individual teeth, maybe in like red or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to play with a little bit of masking here, just for fun. So I'll do a little mask by cavity. I'm going to invert that mask, and then I'm going to fill it in with straight up black. Maybe not that strong. Let's do just using some of that sculptural detail as a way to kind of create color detail as well. And let's do a little bit of mask by smoothness. Oh, that's kind of cool. And mask by curvature. So I'm going to leave that mask the way it is, and then just put a lighter gray. Very low RGB intensity. Give it kind of a nice, that kind of look to it. It's kind of cool. And then I'm going to choose like this tiny dot alpha and sort of a lighter color. Sometimes this can add kind of a nice bit of a texture to it on top of everything else. Whoops. I want to go to spray stroke, color spray. There we go. Kind of going over the top here. Gives it sort of a slightly organic feel to it. Splotchiness. So the yellow is not just a flat yellow, because that's kind of boring. So that looks, I mean, it's kind of has the effect of being war paint, but adding this little, these details on top kind of give it a nice organic feel as well. Yeah, because if this was an actual bug, you would have individual cells creating pigment color. And insects, the exoskeleton is made up of a substance called chitin, which builds up in layers in different ways depending on the bug. to kind of add this kind of stochastic kind of quality to it. I'm always amazed when you look at bugs at how symmetrical sometimes the color pattern can be, and also how, you know, in some cases with some bugs, how amazingly uniform it can be across individuals. Like if you look at a blue morpho butterfly, typical blue butterfly that you see a lot of CG versions of, they're usually wrong, but regardless, if you look at an actual blue morpho, there's always a white dot, 2 white dots towards the top of the upper wing. They might vary in size, but they're always in the same position on every blue morpho. I find that really interesting. And then, of course, in some cases, you have very different coloring from one individual to the next. It really depends on the bug. See how now I have a nice variation in that yellow. It's not just a flat yellow color. You can use the smoothing brush as a blur brush. I'm not going to do it too much on this because I kind of like the fine detail the way it looks, and I don't want to blur that out too much for this particular sculpt. If I like get this brighter, paler yellow on top of the more saturated yellow in these dots, and then I blur it a little bit, you can see the effect that you get. It almost looks like layers of color there, which I think is kind of cool in this area right here. Some of the stretch pattern, I can just blur that out here. And you know, I'm varying the pressure on my stylus as I paint too, so sort of stronger and weaker, which I think also adds to the more organic kind of quality to it. The thing about poly painting, you know, with ZBrush is we're applying colors directly to the points of the surface. So you have to have a really high res surface. This is only 6.6 million poly or points for this particular subtool, which is, you know, pretty average. And the problem is, but this one, you know, I've Z-remeshed it so the polygons are somewhat evenly distributed. If this is an animation model or game model where you have large polygons and small polygons, then poly painting becomes a real problem, because you're going to have, just like sculpting becomes a real problem, because you're going to have areas where that's lower res in terms of density of points, and it's going to be harder to sculpt or paint there. And in that case, that's where something like Substance or even Mori works a bit better, because you're painting on the UVs, not on the points of the surface. But like I say, I like the ZBrush brushes, so getting a poly paint going, even if it's not perfect, is kind of fun to do in ZBrush, and then export that and bring it into Substance and increase the resolution and the quality of it there. That's kind of my preferred workflow, or Marmoset. All right, so I think what I'm gonna do is unfortunately I have to do some work tonight, so I'm gonna have to leave it there for now. But you know, that's kind of where I'm at. And I'll continue working on this next week, doing some more sculpting on the legs and some more painting. And that's kind of getting a nice start there. So thanks for joining me. I'm sorry if the it was a little bit rough tonight because of the connection issues. I don't know what that's causing that. I'll talk to Maxon and see if it's something that they can fix. But I have no idea. It's but it seemed we had audio and video problems with a number of viewers tonight. I apologize for that. I don't think there's much I can do on my end. It seems to be working okay here. I have a strong signal, so thanks a lot, and we'll continue this next week. Maybe get some red going on the teeth here. Paint this upper part so it looks even more menacing.